Snow had been falling since before dusk, the kind that erased roads and softened the world into something quieter and more dangerous, and it was in that white silence that Nayeli, a native woman of 22, stood barefoot at the edge of the trees, her shawl stiff with frost, her breath coming out in fragile clouds. She had been walking until fear and cold became the same thing, until the lights of a lone cabin blurred through the storm like a promise she did not trust, and when she reached the door, her hands shaking so badly she could barely knock, she whispered words that felt smaller than her shame. "May I sleep in your cabin, sir? It's freezing outside," not knowing if mercy lived behind that door, or something far colder. The door opened to reveal Ethan Cole, a cowboy of 30, tall and broad-shouldered, his coat dusted with snow, his eyes carrying the tired watchfulness of a man who had learned to expect disappointment from the world. He took her in slowly, the frost-bitten fingers, the way she stood straight even while trembling, the quiet dignity that pain had not yet broken, and for a moment he said nothing at all. The wind howled behind her like a threat eager to be fulfilled, and something in Ethan's chest tightened as he stepped aside and held the door wider, knowing kindness was never without cost in a place like this. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee grounds, and Nayeli stood just past the threshold as if afraid the warmth might accuse her of something, her eyes lowered, her shoulders braced for refusal even after the door closed behind her. Ethan set another log in the fire, the flames flaring as if startled by company, and offered her a blanket without touching her hand, because some distances were sacred. She sat near the hearth, thawing slowly, aware that safety was fragile here, and as the snow thickened against the windows, both of them wondered how long this fragile peace could survive. By morning, the storm had not broken, and the town had already noticed. Word traveled faster than horses in places where judgment was a pastime, and by the time Ethan rode in for supplies, the sheriff's eyes were already sharp with suspicion. Sheriff Amos Harlan leaned against the post outside the general store and spoke softly, which was always worse, telling Ethan that the native woman did not belong, that trouble followed her kind, that the town would be calmer without her. Ethan listened without arguing, his jaw set, knowing silence could be a kind of resistance, yet wondering how long it would hold. Nayeli felt the town's cold even from inside the cabin. When she walked to the creek to wash, conversations stopped. When she passed the church, eyes followed her like accusations. She returned to the cabin each time with her back straight, sweeping snow from the steps, preparing simple meals from what little there was, refusing to look like someone who needed to beg to exist. At night, she sat by the fire mending Ethan's coat with careful stitches, and he pretended not to watch the way her hands moved with practiced grace, both of them aware that closeness was becoming something dangerous. One evening, after a storm sealed the world beyond the cabin into silence, Ethan left a bundle on Nayeli's bed, a thick wool dress, soft gloves, and a scarf, still carrying the faint scent of the store and his careful choosing, and turned away without a word, as though afraid gratitude might embarrass them both. Nayeli reached for the fabric with trembling fingers, touching it as if it might vanish beneath her hands, her chest tightening with a feeling she had no name for. Later, she brewed coffee and carried a cup to him, offering it with a shy, luminous smile that warmed him more deeply than the fire ever could. They sat together then, knees nearly brushing, sharing the quiet in a way that felt intimate rather than empty, a silence that invited wonder instead of fear, while outside the snow piled higher, slowly erasing the world they had known. It was on one of those endless nights that Ethan, with an almost boyish uncertainty, cleared space near the table and asked if she would dance. His boots were clumsy against the floor, his steps unsure, and Nayeli laughed softly, the sound surprised and beautiful, as if joy itself had forgotten her for a moment and then suddenly remembered. She moved lightly despite the weight of her past, and when he spun her too fast and they nearly stumbled, he caught her at the waist, instinctive and careful all at once. Time seemed to still as they stood there, close enough to feel each other's breath, his heart racing, her gaze lifting to meet his, and though they stepped apart a moment later, Both knew that something tender and irrevocable had been spoken without a single word. The town's patience snapped the day a theft was discovered, tools missing from a neighbor's shed, and suspicion leapt eagerly to Naeli like it had been waiting. The sheriff came to the cabin with men behind him, voices low but sharp, telling Ethan to send her away before worse followed. Naeli stood quietly, already folding her few belongings, her face calm in a way that made the injustice sharper, and when Ethan told them she would stay until the truth was known, the sheriff's smile was thin with warning. That night, before dawn could soften the dark, Naeli tried to leave, stepping into the snow with her small bundle clutched to her chest, believing love meant making herself smaller so others could breathe easier. The cold bit at her skin, but it was nothing compared to the ache in her heart, the old instinct telling her that staying had always been the most dangerous choice. Ethan caught her at the door, his voice breaking rough in the quiet as he asked why she thought disappearing was the only way to keep the peace, as if the idea itself wounded him. She answered without tears, because she had learned long ago how to survive without them, telling him the world had shown her what happened to women like her when they lingered where they were not wanted. The truth in her words settled heavy between them, sharper than any accusation, and Ethan felt something inside him crack open. He took her hands then, carefully, as though afraid she might vanish, and promised, not with raised voice or grand vow, but with steady resolve, that he would stand for her, that he would uncover the truth, even if it cost him the town, even if it cost him everything. He did, not with raised fists or loud demands, but with patience that refused to bend, listening where others were eager to accuse, watching where others turned away, until the truth finally emerged in the clear light of day. The Real thief stood exposed at last, shame flooding his face as the protection he had expected from prejudice slipped away, leaving him small and unmistakably human. The sheriff had little to say when the truth surfaced, his silence heavier than any apology, and the town's eyes fell from Naeli in uneasy recognition, unsure how to face a woman who had carried their cruelty and still stood whole. As Naeli and Ethan walked home together through the falling snow, their steps slow and close, she felt something deep within her finally loosen. It was not triumph, nor the sharp satisfaction of being proven right, but something far more precious, the quiet reclaiming of dignity she had once believed the world could steal. The snow brushed her shoulders gently, and for the first time, it did not feel like a burden, but like a witness. Love followed quietly after that, slipping into their days the way fresh snow settles over familiar ground, soft, inevitable, transforming everything without asking to be noticed. One evening by the fire, as flames whispered and shadows danced along the walls, Ethan finally spoke, his voice low and unguarded, not offering a grand confession but a simple truth he could no longer carry alone. He told her that the cabin no longer felt like shelter unless she was in it, that every corner held her warmth even when she was silent, and that the thought of life without her felt colder than any winter he had known. Naeli did not answer with words. She leaned into him instead, resting her head against his shoulder, her fingers finding his as if they had always belonged there, and in that gentle closeness he felt understood in a way that stole his breath. Outside, the storm eased, the wind quieting as snow fell more softly, as though the world itself had paused to listen to a love finally brave enough to stay. Their wedding came in the heart of winter, simple and proper, held beneath a pale, hushed sky as snow drifted down like tender blessings meant only for them. Naeli wore a modest dress that moved softly with the wind, her hair braided with loving care, each strand a quiet testament to the road she had walked to stand there whole. Ethan stood beside her, hands trembling as he removed his hat, his eyes never leaving her face, as though the world had narrowed to this single, fragile moment. They spoke vows not of grandeur, but of devotion, of being shelter when storms returned, of choosing one another when the world turned cruel or cold, of walking forward hand in hand even when the path disappeared beneath snow. When they kissed, it was slow and reverent, filled with the unspoken knowledge of all they had endured and all they still promised to protect, the kind of kiss shared only by two souls who had already survived together and knew, without doubt, they always would. Married life unfolded in small, radiant moments that felt almost sacred. Quiet mornings where they shared coffee from the same cup as pale light slipped through frosted windows, Ethan brushing Nayeli's fingers with his own as if afraid the day might steal her away. Evenings found them cooking side by side, her laughter ringing soft and bright when Flower dusted his coat, and he would pull her close just to breathe her in, as though joy itself might fade if he did not hold it. They danced by the fire then, slow and unhurried, his forehead resting against hers, every step less like practice and more like a promise that this warmth was real and chosen. On nights when the cold deepened, they wrapped themselves in blankets and sat outside together, watching snow drift down in endless silence, Nayeli's head resting on his shoulder while Ethan traced gentle circles on her palm, neither needing words to say they were safe. Sometimes she would whisper how she never imagined a life this gentle, and he would answer by kissing her hair, grateful in a way that felt almost painful. The town watched them from a distance, uncertain and quietly transformed, as if learning that love, when tended with patience and grace, could soften even the hardest winters. Years later, when the snow still fell without asking permission and the cabin light burned warm and steady against the dark, their story was remembered not for gunfire or glory, but for a single door opened on a freezing night and a choice made with trembling hands yet a fearless heart. It lived in the quiet things, the way that light never went out in winter, the way two shadows always moved together behind the window, the way laughter sometimes drifted into the snow like a blessing. And if you listen closely, truly listen, you can hear it in the wind as it moves through the pines, whispering that love rarely arrives loudly or demands to be believed. It comes softly, asks only for shelter, and when you dare to let it stay, it warms a life, and sometimes a whole world, forever.